Hello and welcome to the Smart Building series, and this is our second free webinar in 2020. Hope everyone out there is doing well. Today we are talking about hearables, not just music, but sound and the environment. And it's going to be a really interesting discussion, if a little bit sort of out of the norm of what we do, but I think definitely something that is increasingly interesting with regards to voice assistance and workplace integration. And we've got a repeat visitor to the Smart Building series, Nick Hunn. He's a wireless expert and has his own consultancy company called Y4, who is our guest speaker and expert today, and very well placed to talk about this issue. So definitely happy to welcome Nick back. Just a couple of things before I let Nick introduce himself. We want to make this as interactive as possible. So if anyone has questions, we're going to start with a presentation. After that, we're very happy to take any questions. Just type them in. I'll get them here and I'll be able to put them to Nick, or if you have any questions for us of memory about some of the research we've done as well, happy to ask those. And then also, please subscribe to our content. You can find all of our sort of webinars now, both as a podcast that's on Apple and also Spotify, and also on YouTube. If you just search for Smart Building Series, you'll find us there as well. It's a whole load of content we're doing on YouTube, so please subscribe. So let's get started. Nick, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you very much, and
Good.
thank you for the opportunity to talk about hearables.
Yeah, really pleased to have you back. And yeah, I thought maybe be good for those of you for those people out there who don't know you, maybe just a brief introduction about you and what you've done and your long, vast experience in wireless. That would be interesting to start with, I think.
Right, thank you for that. I'm Nick. I've been working in tech now for longer than I care to remember. The last 30 years of that very much in wireless technology. So predominantly short-range wireless. I've been heavily involved with Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, other standards like Zigbee, Zensis, and some cellular, particularly more recently narrowband IoT and the IoT-oriented standards that are out there. And during that time, I've started a couple of startup companies. One was acquired by TDK, and the second one was acquired by Laird Technologies. And we were shipping wireless modules of all types into literally hundreds of different companies. So I've got experience of design and manufacture for shipments of millions of products per year. And I think the strapline is we've helped put wireless into everything from sex toys to snowplows. More recently, I've been involved with running the standards development in Bluetooth, looking at the next generation of audio products. Some of you may be aware there was a new Bluetooth core specification released at the start of this year. That was version 5.2, which is putting together the ability of low power that we know from Bluetooth Low Energy with audio transmission. And the aim of that is really to bring us everything we need for audio for the next 20 years, hopefully, in terms of standards. So what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about hearables, and that's very much what the consumer understands when you talk about the latest generation of Bluetooth. But more importantly, a bit about the history, how we've got to where we are today, and some of the things that hearables can do and where they're going. Because it's not just the little white things that people seem to have growing out of their ears. The ear is an excellent place for putting an awful lot of other sensing technology. And that technology tells you a lot about the person. And as many of you will know if you've been listening to some of the other memorial work that's going on, it's how you can interact with the environment. So what we wear in our ears may have quite a lot to do with how we're actually interacting with the buildings around us. So a quick look at what is a hearable. I'll do the sort of standard presentation thing of trying to start with the definition. And basically, hearables are thought of as anything that you put either in or on your ears, which typically has a wireless connection. That's Bluetooth headsets, wireless headphones, hearing aids, earbuds, a range of more esoteric products. But these are the things that we're going to be talking about today. One of the interesting ones is in Bluetooth, we actually started the audio specs way back at the beginning of 2006. The first Bluetooth headsets that could stream audio were out on the market. And as often happens with technology, you can be ahead of the user application. And in this case, we were. They very much languished until Spotify came along. And it's fascinating if you plot that growth curve for Spotify as the users started to listen into that platform and just love the ease of no longer buying anything other than a monthly subscription. That exactly mirrored the growth in Bluetooth headsets as wireless started to take over from wires. And around about the 2015-2016 mark, we actually saw by value that wireless headsets were overtaking the sales globally of wired headsets. And that's just continued apace. So it's an interesting graph because it makes the point that technology by itself isn't enough. You need the application that makes that technology usable. And we'll come across that again. The impact's been massive if we look at what's happened with the hearables market. We've gone from virtually nothing in 2014, 2015. Last year, around about 100 million devices were shipped. That'll double this year, and we see that growing up to over 600 million pairs of headsets by 2025. It's the fastest growing consumer market ever in terms of products that are actually going out. And that I think is fascinating because you start to ask the question of, with that many numbers, with that much money, with that much innovation, what else can we start to do with these things? Very much all started in terms of hearables with the Kickstarter project. Back in 2014, Bragi, a Munich-based company, came out with a concept for a new earbud that basically did everything. It wasn't just Bluetooth audio, it had heart rate sensing, it had temperature sensing, almost anything you could measure in the ear, they put into this product. And it's quite remarkable they actually managed to get it to market. They've since sort of stepped away from hardware. They're now a software company, but they very much made the world aware of what you can do. The product that has really caught the imagination, though, and has got the sales is Apple's AirPods. They've gone from nothing to about 100 million shipments in the course of 3 years. And as I said, people have just fallen in love with these. One of the reasons I think Apple have been successful and others haven't is it's really difficult putting so much technology in something so small. You hit a number of practical problems. You need to synchronize the audio coming out of both your left and right ear. And that's surprisingly difficult. You need to get that right within about 20 microseconds. The head gets in the way. You can't transmit Bluetooth directly from ear to ear because your brain is just a big bag of water that absorbs it. So you have all sorts of issues as to how to do that. It means your antenna design is difficult. Battery life is difficult. Picking up voice accurately and trying to get rid of outside noise means you normally need multiple microphones and audio processing algorithms. And just putting all of that in something so small is a real challenge. It meant that most of the crowd-funded companies never delivered. And even Apple were late in actually shipping products. And they and their major competitors, whether that's Huawei, Google, Amazon, are still struggling to actually meet consumer demand on these products. Now, a lot of that technology comes from the hearing aid industry, and it's one of the reasons why hearing aids are expensive. This is difficult to do, but we're moving to the point where it's starting to become easier as chips are putting in more functionality. we're seeing companies like Qualcomm, HiSilicon, and Broadcom coming out with reference designs. So the platform is getting there to make it easier to make more complex and more differentiated products. And if we look at sort of where we're going and where we are today, we started off with all the enthusiastic stuff from the crowdfunders. Apple then came through and brought us AirPods. And it took Apple about 5 years to develop those first AirPods, which is a surprising amount of time for something that looks so simple. And they got it right by just concentrating on audio. And their view was a very, very sensible one, that audio content was already there. People were already streaming it. Let's design an AirPod to do as efficient a job of audio as possible, to make it sound as good as a wired headset. And we've seen that has now been the benchmark of successful competition from people like Huawei, from people like Google and Amazon, is get the audio right. But what we're going to see coming along is advanced audio. You're seeing that in features today like the noise cancellation. But there's a host of companies that are developing audio algorithms today to do a lot of other things, like picking up ambient sound, so that as you walk out of a noisy building onto a street and from that into a quiet office, whatever you've got in your ear can understand where you are and can start to adapt to that. It will pick up noises like somebody talking to you. So as they do, you can start to turn off the audio you're listening and take part in the conversation. So there's a lot of rather interesting sound algorithms happening that we haven't really seen in any product before. I mean, that's driven in part by the voice assistants that we're also seeing in our homes, which typically are running with 6 or 7 microphones, quite clever beamforming, and again, looking at understanding the ambient around them. The final bit that's coming along was something that the early products like the Dash put in, is biometrics. One of the things that few people realize is if you want to put biometric sensors on the body, the ear is the best place to do it. It's been known for about 50 or 60 years. It's why we measure temperature in the ear. But if you're measuring things such as blood pressure, heart rate, those work really well in the ear. You have a stable environment, unlike your wrist, which we all wave around. And you have quite thin skin areas to get through to actually contact and measure blood flow. So if you want to do biometrics, putting them in the ear is a really good place to do it. And these are all things that are a little bit down the road. We're seeing the sensor technology appearing today, and in the not very distant future, I think we'll start to see that moving into mainstream products. Where do they sell? Well, there's a whole ecosystem around this. Audio playback is the obvious one because content already exists. But we have hearing aids. For people that are just starting off hearing loss, you've got augmented hearing. The industrial side is looking at active protection. So it's no longer just giving people earplugs, but actually putting monitors in the ear so that you can listen to and control the level of sounds and possibly monitor it so that you know what exposure is. The biometrics we've talked about, all of the audio algorithms which are allowing people to start to change the way they listen to sound, and the whole of that aspect of Internet of Voice where we both talk to the devices around us, talk to the homes, the offices around us, and also look at translation. So all of these are areas that play to the hearables to say we're more than just listening to streamed music. One point that has been an issue, and this is the same thing that has proven really difficult to a lot of the health and fitness market for wristbands, is for many products where you're generating data from sensors in that product, you have a bit of a catch-22, that customers buy into the product with the hope that they will get some really compelling feedback about themselves, their lifestyle, how to improve their health. But in order to do that, you first of all need to collect the data, get enough of it to develop useful insight. Only then can you develop compelling feedback and try to offer the consumer a service. but that typically takes 6 to 12 months of data collection, and most consumers give up quite early on. And it means we really need a stealth approach to fitness, whereby people buy a product for another primary purpose and then actually accept that you can pick up some of this data, develop that insight, and get back to them. And it's why hearables are so interesting in many different product areas, that people will buy them first and foremost to listen to music, but they are quite a good platform for putting on other stuff. So bearing those in mind, I'd just like to look at a few areas which I think are interesting to talk to. As I say, with audio, you don't need to develop that content. But what we're seeing in terms of changes in the market, and the first one is we are beginning to give up on touching stuff, not just because of coronavirus, but we're finding it easier to talk to people, and not just talk to people, but talk to the things around us. It's taken a long time to voice recognition to get there, very much driven by what Amazon has done with Alexa. They certainly weren't first in terms of voice interaction, but they were the first in understanding how to make it compelling. And we're seeing that growing. Limited today, still very much to English language. And that's going to be an interesting challenge that the market has, is how to expand voice interaction out to the rest of the world. But that's beginning to happen. Now, we see it in the home with Alexa. One of the interesting hearable products, I think, is Amazon Echo Buds, because they're effectively taking all of the same things that Apple has done and said, let's get all of the audio right. They've got beamforming microphones, so you can also do noise cancellation. You've got the very good balanced armature drivers, so you've got quality sound. But the interesting thing that Amazon adds to this is it means that you can use Alexa wherever you are. So all of a sudden, you've got a hearable which somebody buys predominantly to listen to their music, but then has that same Amazon purchasing experience and the Amazon Alexa experience, whether they're in the house or whether they're outside. We see the model, as I've mentioned, for industrial protection. And one of the novel ideas that are coming out here is we're looking at earbuds that don't just provide isolation from noise to protect you, but can monitor how much exposure you have by having microphones in the ear canal. A problem that the industry is getting is it's getting quite good at reducing the amount of hearing loss due to industrial noise. But when an employee comes in and says, my hearing's going, you no longer know whether that's due to industrial noise or whether because they've been out clubbing the night before. So we're seeing a move to active monitoring in the ear. And that's something that regulation is going to push into consumer products as well, so that you know just who is responsible for hearing loss. And hearing loss is interesting. As the industry has worked to try and reduce occupational noise exposure, we've seen youngsters going out and increasing their own noise exposure by listening to loud music, going to clubs. And the World Health Organization is very concerned that we're seeing over 1 billion teenagers and young adults that are already beginning to show some signs of hearing loss. Hearing loss can be quite devastating in terms of the social consequences, because if you stop listening to somebody, you stop talking to them, and you start to see isolation and loneliness, which hits both family relationships and also people's ability to actually be successful at work. So those are concerns we have. The whole of the hearable market is throwing up concerns as to, is it an earbud? Is it a consumer product? Is it a hearing aid? That market is immense. Hearing aids today only tackle severe hearing loss, and you're looking at shipments of typically only 12 to 13 million products a year. The market overall is 100 times that size, so there is massive opportunity for people to look at that. I think we're going to see some interesting social factors as people start to wear devices around the office. Um, with earbuds, it's very easy to take them in and out to have conversations. And I'm already seeing some companies playing with things like just little changes in the color of lights on the end of their products to signify whether they're listening to you and actually using them to help with any hearing loss, or whether they're just playing their music and they don't care that you're there. So we're going to see some fascinating social factors around hearing loss. And we're already seeing office integration. Microsoft has come up with these quite big white Microsoft Surface hearables that stream music, but also have large touch-sensitive areas that you can swipe if you want to change your slides in a PowerPoint presentation, if you want to integrate with any of your Office 365 applications. I'm also seeing people beginning to think about how you integrate these devices that people wear with the office itself. With those Bluetooth links, you know a lot about presence. You can use them for authentication. We already have some prototype devices that will actually fingerprint your ears and recognize that they are in your ear and can use that information to enable your laptop or access to anything around you. So even if somebody steals them, they are not going to be able to actually challenge that and make it look as if they're you. So unlike all of those films you see where somebody cuts a finger off so the fingerprint still works, with that ear authentication, you should be quite safe unless you're decapitated. We have those sensors. That means you can actually use the things in your ear for environmental monitoring. And we know they're already coming out with health sensors. So where does it all go to? I don't know. It's a platform that is ripe for innovation, for differentiation. I would just say, look at where Apple has gone. Over the past 5 years, we've had 5 series of the Apple Watch. It started with heart rate. It then adds more and more features. We have ECGs, force sensors, altimeters, and think, well, we've started to see that same evolution on AirPods. Where are the next couple of versions of those going to take it? The one thing we do know is the market is growing. It's predicted to reach around about $80 billion in 2025. And that's largely driven just by people wanting to listen to music. If we can add additional functionality, that will only increase that total opportunity. So that's basically an overview of where the market is. I've written a couple of reports. I did one 5 years ago. I've just updated it. Those are both free to download, so go and pick those up. The predictions in the first one were fortunately quite accurate, so I'm still happy for you to go and read the old ones as well as the new ones. And I write regularly on this and other areas of technology. But that's me. Your questions, and Jim, what have you got to ask?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought that was fascinating. Thank you, Nick. Yes, as Nick said, anyone with questions, please please type them in now. We are open for any really discussions about this, and I think it's an absolutely fascinating area. Potential here is really as as much as anyone's imagination. So, I mean, I'll kick it off. Obviously, I think some of the things.
Lost your sound.
Oh, okay.
How's that? Is that better?
I can hear you again.
Good. Okay.
Sorry, it must have been my connection. No, I was just going to say, I think some of the things I picked out from your presentation. Obviously, I think some of the things that are most interesting to me are like what you were saying about the office integration, and I'll come on to that. But more so around the how the market has developed so far. And actually, it's fascinating you mentioned that company, Bragi, and why perhaps they didn't, although they championed, let's say, the market, but they didn't end up sort of getting as much traction as some of the other companies. Was that because you think they tried to do too much too early? Was that one of the issues?
I think very much. I mean, they struggled to get the product out. And I think everybody who'd had experience of what they were doing was looking at them and saying, you're not going to do this. It's just so difficult to put all of this in. And to their credit, they did get it all in. One of the issues that you then have is you're ending up with a dozen different sensors and applications, and you are going to have to try and optimize all of them, and it needs a massive resource to do that. Apple were very, very focused. They took the view that they had to develop a wireless earpod because they were going to take the jack out from the iPhone 6. And everything was focused on just one thing. We need to provide streaming audio, and it needs to be the highest possible quality. I'm sure along the way there were a lot of engineers said, well, you could put this in, you could do that. And they had the discipline to say, no, we are just going to do the important stuff. And I've seen that if you look at most of the products that are shipping in volume today, they have just concentrated on getting music right. Once people have got that right and know what to do with it, then I think we'll see the differentiation happening. But for a small company to try and do that, it is incredibly difficult.
Mm. Yeah, and you mentioned that.
And if you take these pieces, and if you ever sort of drop one in your beer or whatever, I would say get out a scalpel and a heat gun and take it to pieces to see just how it's made inside. It's a stunning sort of origami job of just how do you fit that amount of electronics in.
Yeah, I mean it's classic Apple, isn't it? With the way it's the simplicity, but that hides this just massive technical challenge. It's very impressive.
Yep.
But as you said, it took them 5 years, so you can see that it was, and they were late. They were late doing it. You mentioned that some of these companies are struggling to meet demand. Is that still the case? And why is
That's still the case? If you talk to major distributors, they are all saying that for the top products, demand is still outstripping supply. I think that most of the companies that are up there at the top end with these products, producing the ones that users want, are still surprised by the level of demand for them. And surprisingly, for products that have gone for sort of from nothing to 100 million devices, there's not been that much pressure on price. And I think that's also sort of that nice one, that because they're difficult to make, it's quite difficult to expand production. And while they're in demand, you don't feel all of the consequences of commoditization because everybody is just struggling to make as many as they can. And you don't get price pressure that way.
Yeah.
I mean, equally, there are a lot of little lookalike earbuds that are coming out in China around about the $5-10 mark. And some of them not bad quality. And I'm not entirely sure where they're all going. I think most of them are going into the internal Chinese market. But I mean, Huawei, who are probably shipping a similar quantity of their free buds to what Apple is shipping, even they are still being challenged in terms of being able to meet that demand. This does seem to be the product that everybody wants to have.
Yeah. And as you saw and showed those figures, that it's fastest growing, one of the fastest growing consumer markets ever. I mean, it's quite stunning, really. Yeah. I mean, and I guess driven by various things, but I think Apple really did have a big a big influence on that and how it's grown. A couple of things I wanted to also pick out of your presentation. And again, I think what most people who are listening to this now or listening to this later will be interested in sort of really how this impacts the built environment, right? I mean, that's really what we write about, and what I'm most interested in is about this Hiraballs as a platform for controlling our environment. So sort of two things that I picked out. One was also Alexa. I don't know if we could go back to that slide where you showed the Amazon Alexa buds. I mean, I don't know. I'm interested on your take on this as well. But I've sort of been quite underwhelmed by some of the smart speakers. Do you think that? And I think that's just in two ways, really. I think the technology is still getting better. It's come a hell of a long way in terms of speech recognition, but it's definitely improving. But also, I think a lot of the time people struggle with, as you mentioned earlier, like the use case, right? We need the application to make the tech worth it. Is putting it into people's ears, is that really going to, do you think, make those applications even more useful for people?
I think the interesting one here is going to be what happens with voice. And when mobile phones first came out, the industry made money out of voice because we used them to make phone calls. And we used them to make phone calls a lot of the time where we didn't used to make phone calls, which is anytime we were out of the house. And it grew a completely new mobile industry of operators and the whole of the supporting infrastructure behind it that hadn't existed before. We then stopped using voice to a large degree when social media came out, and we just started using our fingers and then camera phones. Voice is beginning to provide a pivot back to us not necessarily typing, but actually talking to things. And at the moment, I think we're in the first phase, if you look at Alexa and voice assistants, where we're seeing all of this, lots of sensible, but also quite a lot of silly applications coming out, which people will probably get tired of quite quickly. But one of the places where it is working is over and above the standard things of just saying, look, stream me this, play me that, is it does seem to be the glue that is pulling together a real smart home experience, rather than something that had been very much the geeky approach of I'm going to automate my house and nobody else can use it.
Yeah.
So the next step from that will be how we use voice commands in the office. And we've not really seen the voice assistant move into the office yet, partly because by its nature, it's not that personal. It works in the home because there aren't many of you in the room, and it's quite easy to pick out who's doing something and what to do, and you normally do it cooperatively. In the office, that's not the case, but once you've got something sitting in your ear, you can be pretty sure it's your voice that's being picked up, not least because most of the hearables out there today have one of the microphones that's physically touching sort of bones inside the ear, so that you're picking up voice conduction, bone conduction, as well as having a secondary microphone that's picking up your voice. So you could have a number of people talking together in a room, and each of those, that hearable, will be picking up that person's voice. That means you can start to look at how you pull voice control into a system. It's potentially interesting that we could go from the point where we have got to where everybody types in what is otherwise a silent room because they've all got the headphones on, to an environment that everybody can be actually dictating to their computer in front of them, with nobody else having any interference from that because they're still listening to something that has cancelled out the noise from around them. So working environments can start to change. It makes it so much easier, particularly if you've got hearing loss coming in, and hearing loss in an office environment is going to become critically important. We don't design office environments today particularly well from the audio point of view in terms of somewhere where it's easy to hold a conversation. And at the same time as we're seeing hearing loss starting to kick in around 30, we need ways to make sure that people can engage very well in conversations around that office, because quite a lot of the work we do is still based on understanding each other and sharing ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've really picked out some interesting issues there. I mean, that was something that I'd written down while you were talking about the office design and how, as you said correctly, I think that they're not well designed in terms of, you know, sound and cancelling, you know, certain areas for different practices, and we've seen that, I think, a lot more over the last few years with this concept of activity-based working, which is quite fashionable at the moment, where you kind of split the office up, right? And you have different areas for different types of work. So you have booths for phone calls, rooms for meetings, other areas, breakout areas, lunch areas, etc. But, you know, really, like as you said, like if the technology improves, which I'm sure it will with us, you have kind of like automatic audio zones, right? So you can cancel noise out and take a phone call without having any issue.
Yep.
that other people can hear. And I think that's really interesting, like this kind of instant isolation without then having to design different areas. Is that something?
It's one of the,
Go on. Sorry.
yeah, it's one of the interesting things about architecture today, and I've been working with a startup that's trying to look at how do you measure the sort of audio quality of buildings. Is one of the things that we see is most architects don't have an understanding of noise control. And even where they do, it tends to be the first thing that gets cut off when somebody is trying to pare the price down. And remarkably few buildings, I mean, if you look at the amount of money that WeWork and the other is putting into sort of office buildings, almost none of that money is put into making it a good auditory environment to work in. And whilst I don't think the route forward or the best one is necessarily the approach of saying we will use clever hearables to try and cope with cut price architects. It may well be a useful and profitable solution to try and make the working environment better.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, we'll have to see how that plays out. But it did occur to me when you were talking that it is something that, I mean, you see it now already. I mean, it's they're quite ubiquitous, the hearables now, and even just sitting in an office, and even where I am, most people will have headphones in, be it earbuds or something else, and yeah, it's just the way things are at the moment. People are using them to cancel noise out, to listen to something while they're doing work, or even just so that they don't have to hear perhaps conversations that are happening while they're trying to focus. And yeah, I think that's, again, that could be we like how voice has been extended as the main use case.
Interesting. If you look at the average hearing aid user, they wear their hearing aid for around about 9 hours a day, and we're seeing some wearers of hearables actually wearing them for longer than people with hearing loss wear a hearing aid.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I sometimes forget they're in.
Yeah, that addiction to having, and particularly music in your ear, is a weird one. It's a remarkably new thing in terms of human evolution, but we have taken to it sort of as much as to any other drug we've had.
Yes, just to remind everybody, if you do have some questions for Nick, now is the time to put them to him. You might not have another chance to talk to an expert in wireless, so feel free to pick his brains while we have him here. I think the other thing that struck me with this kind of built environment interaction, of course, then is what you were saying about not just authenticating an individual, so like the biometric side, but also the voice command side. I mean, you mentioned then sort of authenticating with perhaps the enterprise, but also potentially access control or room booking. I mean, do you see? I don't suppose is there anybody working on this kind of stuff at the moment, or do you see that developing?
I'm seeing demonstrations coming out. Is probably a more accurate description. I mean, it's interesting. Some of the companies that have been involved in sort of the high end of consumer audio are beginning to look at audio as a platform. And to that extent, it's developing operating systems that you can start to run audio applications on. Effectively, I suppose, using audio as sort of augmented reality. So that is looking at how you use voice commands, but also understanding sound in the environment and what else you can monitor with that. So there are certainly products that are being worked on. I think at the CES next year, we're probably going to see some of the first public exposures of some of those. And I think it may be a little bit like Google Glass. I mean, everybody tends to discredit Google Glass and say, well, look, it didn't work. The reality is the second version of that is out there and it's doing very well in commercial and industrial applications. And that's what fascinates me about this particular aspect. I think we may see the same thing, that although we have enormous consumer uptake today because Apple have done the basics and got music streaming right, yet I think there's another layer of that which people are going to look at to say, how do we take that and what are the audio applications that then go into the workplace? What are the occasions where I need to talk to things? What are the occasions where you need to know it's me? We can even do things if you're talking, you know which way you're looking because of the being able to pick out sort of flight of time sounds. So there's quite a lot of interesting stuff that's happening down at an R&D level today that I would expect to see come out and get implemented into products in the next few years.
Yeah, this reminded me when you sort of talked about augmented audio, that you say like how you go around an art gallery or a museum, and you can rent those kind of like I guess audio device with some headphones, and then they talk. You go past a painting, and then you can get some audio to describe it to you. I mean that obviously very basic, but that kind of thing I think is. I mean, must be a lot of applications around that kind
That's
of thing.
already rolling out in some places, and there was an interesting trial that Microsoft ran along with some hearing aid companies a few years ago to actually provide audio instructions as you walk around. So part of your travel plan will be telling you, is it the right tube train you're getting on? Do you need to get out? Which way do you turn at each juncture? So, and whole of augmented audio is there for instructions. And if you think about what's being done with some of the augmented reality glasses, I mean, typically, if you're working with Boeing and Airbus, you use those when you're wiring planes up. There's a lot that can be done with audio instruction. So while you're doing a task, is being prompted, reminded of what you need to do. And it's a lot less intrusive than wearing the glasses. It's a lot lower powered. So we do see a lot of interest in terms of how do you use that audio augmentation to actually help people, typically with industrial tasks.
Yeah, it just struck me then as well, things like visitor management systems as well. So maybe you've got to send somebody who doesn't know the building to a particular meeting room.
Yep.
You could give them instructions. And I know a lot of people, I mean, there's quite a few startups who are doing indoor mapping and looking at wayfinding and that kind of thing. And there's clearly some, might be quite useful. Audio is particularly, I would say, useful for that kind of thing as well.
Yeah. I mean, an analogy I have is about 10 years ago, everybody started to think quite hard about what do we do when people bring their phones into the office. And there have been some interesting aspects of that. I don't think we've seen the integration that perhaps some thought about. But when you bring your earbuds into the office, it's effectively the same thing. You're bringing your own devices in, and there are some good opportunities to try and see how you integrate that. Now, people buy earbuds because it makes their life experience, if you want to call it that, feel better. So I think if you're looking at building integration, one of the things is, how do you help provide information? I mean, it's interesting if you go to sort of Apple's new spaceship building, they've got quite a lot of apps that are phone-based at the moment. So you can not only order what you want in the canteen before you go for lunch, but you can find out how long the queues are to get it. So you can adjust what you're doing. And using audio for that can make life a lot easier. So I expect to see it integrated in more the sort of the welfare well-being apps at work as a first point, because that's what people appreciate. It works for them. You get comfortable with the experience.
Right.
Once you've got to that point, you can start to think about, and how do I layer some of the other aspects in? It's all about taking little steps that don't appear to challenge privacy, but enhance the experience, and then slowly building up as you make work a more integrated experience. And that's what it should all be about, your integration of the work, the building you're in, to make it as enjoyable as possible, because that way you're going to make it as productive as possible.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I think, and that you mentioned there's sort of these tenant experience apps. We've seen, part of what we do is we look at sort of startups that are in the smart building space, and we've seen a lot of sort of startup companies coming out with these tenant experience apps. Very interesting. Some of the applications you were talking about there, like, showing just simple things like showing menus or promoting events within the company, all that kind of thing. You can see quite easily it's not so much of a stretch, right, then to take that, just rather than having to get your phone out, you can speak to Alexa and then ask, let's say, hey, what are the queues like in the canteen at the moment, or what's on the menu? Again, sort of a bit of a tighter integration, as opposed to having to get your phone out, look at the app, scroll through it, etc.
And one of the things that we do see as people start to wear earbuds is they get their phone out less, they touch the phone less. It's interesting when we're going to get to peak smartphone and when we're going to start even carrying something that looks like a phone round with us. We do it today because we've been through the social media, but a lot of people today, if they're streaming music and if they can control it either from touching their earbuds or just by saying what they want to do, leave the phones in their pockets for a lot longer during the course of the day. And that's one of the great things about voice. It's very flexible with what you can ask and what you can do, potentially even more so than a phone screen. So the more we become comfortable with talking to our environment, the less we're likely to want to bother with getting a phone out. And at some point, we may even start to say, well, do we need to carry a phone around with us? Or do I actually put my phone connection in something else that I have, rather than having it as a phone?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it will be interesting to see when, like you said, peak smartphone is. I mean, I think we're not there yet, clearly, but was. Oh, okay.
Well, if you look at the numbers, we are past peak smartphone.
Interesting. Yeah, didn't realize that.
I mean, part of that is we now keep the phones longer. But in terms of smartphone sales per year, we reached the peak about 2 years ago.
But would that apply to usage time, do you think, or?
No, that applied to physical sales in terms of numbers of phones shipped.
Okay, yeah.
Usage time, I don't know. I mean, I would expect the usage time to go up because earbuds are allowing people to stream music for longer. And because they're easy and they're usable and they're comfortable, you will keep them in when you get home to still stream music off your phone, rather than going and turning on a hi-fi system or something else to listen to that music. So in terms of network usage, I think we're fine. Well, we know data usage is going up. In terms of sort of finger time on your phone, I suspect that's going down.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm sure Apple have got the answer to these questions, but we don't at the moment. They're monitoring
Yes,
closely all that kind of stuff. Yeah. One of the other slides I thought was really interesting was the Office, Microsoft Office slide you put up. Can we see that one? Yeah, and I think I had no idea that they had their own version, but I think this integration with Office 365 could be very, very interesting. And again, I think they've done a good job of, taking that product into the cloud and then using it and it is much more dynamic now than it used to be. Even to the point where I think you can look at sort of how communication within the company and how emails are being sent, how documents are being shared, and I can see the potential then for audio being used, more as a communication tool. So maybe you're not having obviously we talk about in the office about wanting to create that environment of co-creation, creativity, and bouncing ideas off each other. might be, but might help that as well. It doesn't necessarily just have to be about isolating people, right, and cutting noise out, but it could be adding people into the conversation as well, potentially.
Yes, and the slight irony that we're using technology to get back to the point of talking to each other.
Yeah, right. yeah. But yeah.
But no, I think the Microsoft Surface, it's an odd-looking thing, but we're seeing some interesting products coming out where people are saying, well, look, nobody thought you'd put something like an AirPod in your ear, but they're happy with it. So what else can we do? And I think it's people like Microsoft who are saying, well, how do we make Office 365 a bit more personal, that you don't actually need something in front of you? I think the Alexa experience with the Echo Buds is that interesting one of how do we move what we now know is a usable service model outside the home. These are people that are saying, we have business models already. Can we make them more mobile? And that's what their hearable devices are doing.
Yeah, we'll have to see how that plays out. I mean, what do you? I mean, I think again that slide you put up of sort of showing how the phone, sorry, how the Apple Watch is developed, and then potentially thinking about that one there, yeah, how the earbuds will develop. I mean, have you had any thoughts about that? What do you think they'll be doing next?
Next, I don't know. That they're taking small steps, as in fact they did with the watch. Now, if you look inside, some of those are quite big technical steps. I would be very surprised if we don't see some biometric sensors and health sensors appearing. That's what's been happening by the watch. They are already accumulating a lot of data, which gives them that core knowledge base that they can use for developing apps. And there's a lot of fascinating stuff you can do when you've got a sensor in an ear and a sensor on the wrist, particularly if it's the opposite side of the body. You can do some very, very much more accurate ECG measurements doing that. So I would expect to see some health sensors appearing at some point. I mean, I don't know looking back, and I will probably never get a correct answer. I don't even know if Apple knew it. I don't know whether they ever intended there to be a second generation of AirPods, or whether it was initially just going to be a statement product to go along with the announcement that they've taken the jack out. And the assumption was that then Beats would do all of this. The reality now is they're vastly outselling Beats in terms of an audio headset provider.
Yeah, that's great.
Because
so in a sense, was that, I mean, was that acquisition of Beats because they had some wireless technology, or was it just yeah, it seems a bit of an irony now that they're outselling them.
No, the wireless technology came from an earlier chip acquisition.
Okay.
And in fact, Apple developed their own wireless chip. So they've got their own Bluetooth and Wi-Fi chip that initially went into the AirPod. That has gone more recently into Beats products, and Apple's now on its second generation. It's interesting, they felt the need to develop their own Bluetooth chip to get all of the functionality they needed. But if we go over to Huawei, then Huawei's silicon division, High Silicon, has done exactly the same thing for their earbuds, their FreeBuds. They have their own low power audio chip with a lot of audio DSP functionality built in. And we're seeing, I mean, the component market's changing massively. We're seeing little MEMS microphones, so little engineered silicon microphones, which have built-in digital signal processing. So at the very point of capture of voice and audio, you're already starting to throw in your processing algorithms. And we've got some very sophisticated beamforming coming out in both some of the sort of home voice assistant products, also just in little assistant microphones for hearing aids. I mean, an average hearing aid today has 3 or 4 microphones in, doing very clever beamforming and processing. Yeah,
I mean, it's developing with the technology is incredible, really, and how, as you mentioned in your presentation, how quickly it's developing. I think it's interesting to me. I mean, I totally agree with you, by the way, like about how I can imagine that Apple are going to, you know, create a more sort of some health wellness experience using both the headphones and the watch. I think that makes a lot of sense, but sort of slightly ironic that perhaps, you know, we trust as consumers, like we trust Apple with all this data, but like people complain at work if if they think they're being like monitored, or like, you know, someone knows where they're sitting in the office. Doesn't seem to stack up.
It is that interesting irony. I mean, it's that old adage that sort of, if you get the service for free, then you've become the product.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. We're coming to the end, I think, Nick, of our hour. It's been fascinating. Maybe you just want to bring up that last slide, and let everybody know that if they want to get hold of you, there you go. There's your details there.
So everything there. If you want to send the slides around to anybody that signed up, please feel free.
I will. I'll put them online. Yeah. Just got a quick last question here from the audience. Let's do this one while we've still got a bit of time. Architects have been mentioned as a gatekeeper to audio opportunities, or a reason that the audio tech spec is downgraded. Do you feel the experience and importance of audio hearing in the workspace is becoming more important to them, or does their design still rule over practicality? Any insight there, Nick, on how architects think?
I don't think it needs to be a battle of is it practical. I think in far too many designs, the building is designed first and foremost as structural design, at which point it's the what do we need to do to try and improve the audio quality of it. I think it would be nice to see a more holistic approach where we don't have to add sticking plasters to make it a good working environment, rather taking the approach of how do you design this to be a good working environment. And I think we still have a big challenge that a lot of workspaces are designed first and foremost by so the physical aspect of where are people sitting, and what is the movement like, how do people interact, without thinking about the fact that most of that interaction is going to be by voice. So how do you make it a comfortable environment to hold conversations? I'm aware of many, many conference rooms where you sit in and talk for a day and you come out with a sore throat because you realize you're having to shout just to be heard over the air conditioning.
Mm. Yeah,
we need to think about those things of just how do you get the relative dB level down and the acoustics right within rooms where you expect people to speak.
No, I mean, absolutely. But it's a very difficult, I think, difficult problem. It takes into account so many different variables and factors.
Yeah.
But my take on that, I think, is if we can do more work with data modeling, digital twins, I think we can design or have more sophisticated designs and therefore bring in more, be able really to model audio and sound and things like that. But yeah, at some point anyway.
And I think there's an aspect there, I mean, both for architects and perhaps even more for people commissioning them, is to ask the question of, have you done an acoustic evaluation on this design?
Yeah, absolutely.
And see how many times you get a stunned silence.
Indeed. And the answer to the last question there, how do we get the slides? They will, I'm going to post them on our website. They will be up on probably later this evening or tomorrow. So yes, last thing here, if you want to get hold of Nick, there is details, but also I definitely encourage people to go and subscribe to his blog, nickhunn.com. It's excellent. So thanks for that, Nick. And of course, thank you for giving us an hour of your time today. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you for the opportunity.
And just want to say, if anyone wants to subscribe, please do that. You can do that through either iTunes or Spotify, or indeed on YouTube. So please feel free and do that. Yeah, that's it. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.